questions between Kristy and the panelists, and then we'll open it up for audience questions at the end. If you're joining us virtually, please type your questions into the Q&A, and then we'll open it up for in-person questions at the end as well. I'll turn it over to Kristy, who's going to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to our panelists. I'm super honored to be here to introduce these lovely women and these trailblazers in the field that I am in and that I aspire to continue to grow in. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to our panelists, and then I'm going to dive right into the questions, ladies. So I hope we're all ready. So starting us off, Sherryta Freeman is the Director of Athletics at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. She is coming up on, it might actually be this week, her 4th year in that role. Her path came through Temple. Actually, all of our panelists' path came through Temple. Our next panelist today is Traci Green. She is in her 15th season leading the Harvard women's tennis program as their head coach. And our 3rd panelist today is Maisha. She is the Director of Athletics at Drexel University right here in Philadelphia, and she took over that role in June of 2021. So welcome, ladies. I'm so excited to be here with you. I hope you guys are ready for some interesting conversation and questions. I'm going to start. These questions are actually for all of the panelists. So I think perhaps, Traci, if you're good leading us off with this first question, can you tell us briefly about your career and how your experience and your path through Temple has helped shape your experience in athletics?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you, Lizzie, Deborah, everybody responsible behind the scenes for putting this panel together. It's great to see old faces again, literally. Over the years, it's been amazing just, growing up with these folks. But yeah, events like this are amazing, a great way for us to connect and really learn from each other. But when I think about Temple, it really has been a huge part of my life. I really mean literally. I grew up at Temple. My mom was a professor at Temple and a coach. She coached field hockey and lacrosse. So I literally was in her womb on the sidelines while she was playing lacrosse games. I have photos. So when I say I grew up at Temple, I really did. My parents made sports a huge part of my life. Growing up, I would, like a normal weekday as a kid, I'd go watch, Temple basketball, John Chaney, playing games in the, at that time, it was McGonigal Hall. I would go to her practices after school. I would do my homework in her office, go run out like a racquetball racket and play in one of the open gyms. So sports at a young age were really a part of my life. And my younger brother. And I'm very grateful for my parents who made it okay for me to play sports and do whatever I wanted to do. So again, I'm very grateful for them. And more in terms of Temple, even when I got a little bit older, it was always in the background, like, should I go to grad school at Temple? Where should I go? And I'm so grateful that the opportunity came about where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after tennis. I got involved in tennis, probably around like 14, seriously. And I got very good. I was one of the top players nationally and made the national team. I got to travel all around the world and go to a pretty cool tennis school with a national championship and things like that. But after school, I was trying to think about what I wanted to do. Did I want to go pro? I had some injuries. And grad school was the next choice for me. And that really was a great launching pad for me. I also had a full-time job at the time. I worked in a program called Gear Up. And we basically worked in some of the most underperforming schools in Philly, helping kids get into college. So that was a very eye-opening experience for me as well. And then my last year, I basically became a GA at Temple for the tennis program. So I really got a hands-on view of coaching. I was a volunteer coach at one point at Temple as well. And it was amazing to see Sherryta in the department there and have her, just see her every day and just have her such a huge influence on me. Just to have somebody you could see who looked like you, who was doing amazing and just ascending in their own career and pathway. And I never thought I really wanted to be a coach forever. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to keep going to grad school. So once I already had my master's degree, I actually left Temple as an assistant And I worked full-time with the Euro program in a different capacity as a manager. And after that, the head coach job became available at Temple. Took that, our team was winning, started doing my doctorate work, and the phone was ringing because we were just doing so well, and that's how I got to Harvard. But as far as Temple goes, it's always been a part of my life. Any way I can give back, I do it as much as I can. So very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Traci. Sherryta, do you want to get in there?
Absolutely. And I will echo Traci's sentiments in terms of just being really excited to be on the call with all of you this morning. Temple has been a big part of my life as well. And so anytime the phone rings or I get an email with an opportunity to share thoughts about my path and my experience, I'm certainly excited to do that. My career, I would say I spent the majority of my, the longest amount of time, 10 plus years at Temple University, which was pretty phenomenal. And I think a very pivotal point in my career in terms of preparing me for the role that I have today. I grew up in New Jersey, did my undergraduate time at Dartmouth College, spent time at the Ivy League office, went to UMass for grad school. After spending a couple of years at Dartmouth in compliance, which was my first opportunity to have a full-time job, there was an opportunity to come and run my own office at Temple University. And I had never been at the institution before. I certainly had been to Philadelphia numerous times, but immediately fell in love with the place and felt like it was home. And so to be able to spend 10 years there, to be able to have the opportunity for growth, working in compliance, working directly with student athletes. It was an opportunity for me to understand what it meant to develop, to have strong mentors, to be able to lift others around you, and certainly to have an impact on the student athletes and coaches that I worked with every single day. And I would say, my experience at Temple was foundational to my role as an athletic director here at Lafayette College. Certainly working with coaches, navigating through challenging situations, understanding the value of your network, understanding the importance of clear communication. All of those things I learned while I was at Temple. I came in, I was running my office. I was young, I was 25 years old running a compliance office. I did not know what I was doing. I thought I did, but I was relying on people around me. And certainly as you are developing throughout your careers, you're learning along the way, you're preparing yourself for whatever it is that's going to be next. So I value that time that I had there because it certainly prepared me for where I am today.
Sherryta. Maisha, last but certainly not least.
Sure, thank you. And I also want to echo the gratitude in certainly being invited to join the panel, but then also being amongst women who I've known for some time and feel really humbled to be in your company. So my Temple roots, certainly not as deep as Traci's, but my mom actually is a grad of Temple nursing. I too recall the times of going to McGonigal Hall, seeing the likes of Mark Macon and certainly the legendary John Chaney. So actually Temple is probably the one Philadelphia institution that I have the deepest roots with. And now even coming back, my husband being a track coach on staff there and just remaining connected to the institution is outstanding and a lot of fun. And so I look, my Temple experience, I'll talk through the lens of being a student a grad student in School of Tourism and Hospitality Management. And at the time when I was a student, I was also teaching and coaching. So I was on my grind, just trying to figure out, what do you do with a history degree? And you start out teaching, but you don't want to teach. You want to get into the field of sports management. And so I was really fortunate to be getting some part-time experience, but then also getting my master's part-time. What really made my time as a student and being a professional, so being a sixth grade teacher, is that I could start applying, and a coach, I could start applying some of the lessons, some of the things that were talked about, whether it be conceptually, in those pockets, in those spaces of a classroom, in the spaces of being a coach, and then really starting to realize what the industry of intercollegiate athletics looked like, and from a couple different lenses. And so as I reflect back and think about just the scope of exposure, and to you students, what you're exposed to, whether it be the undergraduate pathway or the graduate, things start to really kind of materialize as you get deeper and deeper into the industry. I recall classes when we talked about marketing and just what, any news, bad or good, right? It's news. It's news about your brand. And now 20 years later, we're talking about brand and the impact of brand, and not only just the brand of a team or organization or department, but even our own individual brand as that shows up for student athletes in particular with name, image, and likeness, and then other things. And for me, of course, I don't talk about my time at Temple without also mentioning Dr. Jackson. And so Michael Jackson and his impact and all the courses that I'm sure many of us who are grads of the program have taken, but lessons where you get to hear from practitioners. So a class of just other individuals coming in, and you hear about the field, you hear about what it's like to work in marketing, what it's like to work in compliance, coaches. And and I'll say this because I actually say this to my own family members, one of the best pieces of advice that I got during that time was to open up an IRA, open up a Roth IRA, go out and start investing your funds. And so at 25 years old, that's what I did. So I actually am passing that forward. But really my point too is the fact that between the classes where one project where it's a class about facilities, that's not a pathway that I went into professionally, but right now as an athletic director, I need to have an orientation and awareness about what it takes to go into maintaining or updating a facility. We picked Franklin Field because being the track person that I am, that was great to be in the belly of that iconic building. But the pieces I think that really resonate are from my time at Temple and what I gleaned as far as the lessons learned and how they impact what I do now. It's that broad perspective of the industry and really thinking about those lessons learned, those topics, those different varied positions that I was introduced to, and how now in a leadership role, how that melds together in our organization and industry. So I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be able to talk about Temple, and certainly to a group of students in particular.
Thank you so much for that. I too was a history major in undergrad, and I too sat through many of Dr. Jackson's classes in grade school. So fond memories for sure. If I can stick with you for a minute, Maisha, in talking about your experience and the experience that you've had, and all three of you have had slightly different paths in your journey to where you are now. Can you talk a little bit about some unique challenges and as a woman in this field and as a Black woman in this field, and also the opportunities and how your different paths have left an impact on where you are now? So whether that's one particular experience or challenge that you overcame, or if you want to choose the opportunity that you've experienced through your different paths.
Sure. So as far as experiences through my career that have impacted me, there have been across the spectrum. As I mentioned, I started out as a teacher. And so I was 23 years old, I think making $23,000, working actually at Waldron Mercy Academy, just right up the street from where I did my undergraduate school at St. Joe's. And at that time, I always say it's funny that I could run in a singlet and briefs in front of 50,000 people at Franklin Field for Penn relays, but stepping in front of an 8th grade classroom for student teaching and then eventually a 6th grade classroom as a teacher was pretty intimidating. But the reality is that it was the best decision I made professionally to start out as a teacher. It really molded my ability to think about the different learners, different communication styles, and how I present myself, and also build a confidence, right? I'm in that classroom because that's my role. And so I need to show up and be confident in that, and taking that through all the spaces that I would navigate in life. And that really lent itself to my biggest themes are showing up, being authentic and confident. And those are things that it comes oftentimes with time. It's refined over time, particularly as you get invited into different spaces. But my career as a teacher was absolutely a strong foundation. Other experiences that impact my career was being able to work at the NCAA national office. To me, I don't know that there is a better organization to work for to understand the broad landscape of intercollegiate athletics across divisions 1, 2, and 3, private, public institutions, religious institutions. And so really just understanding, again, the industry. I tell our team today, it's made me really focused on when I think about organizational structures and think about the governance system, because we see that on our campuses through conference structure and nationally. And so that also had a huge impact in just, again, a preparedness and being able to talk about and understand, one, where I wanted to be as a professional, where on that spectrum of institution and experiences I wanted to be. But then a real wake up and sort of grow up moment for me too was my time at the NCAA back in 2010, when I had to face a room of Division I men's swimming and diving coaches and tell them that we were delaying their championship because some select teams had individuals, student athletes and coaches who were sick. There was a virus that was going around the country and had been caught on some of the planes of teams traveling in. And so having to stand up in front of that group, that was one of those moments where I started to really think about how do you manage coaches? How do you manage coaches who absolutely are zoned in on doing what they do best, winning championships and just navigating tough conversations and doing that again as a professional, dealing with crisis management, dealing with how you communicate and have those tough conversations was a big deal. And it was, again, it was that 8th grade classroom experience standing in front of that group that I think probably gave me some confidence in that regard. So.
Thank you. Traci, working with student athletes and coming up through coaching, what were some of the challenges that you faced and how that has left an impact on the coach that you are today?
Sure, Maisha brought up a great point earlier about just balancing while in grad school. And for me, that was one of the hugest things. I mean, it's coming in, like I said before, working full-time and going to grad school is no joke. Coming in, I remember those nights, late night classes, Maisha, right? Just, figure it all out. But being able to do that at that age, right? At that time in my life really prepared me for the future, right? Being able to balance. People ask me, what was one of your biggest accomplishments were you most proud of? And it's, believe it or not, I was graduating, getting my master's degree. I was doing so much at that time. I was trying to buy a house. I was trying to coach. I was working full time. It was all kind of things. So that was huge for me. Obviously, once you do get into coaching, you have to have thick skin. You got to have thick skin. There's always things coming at you, all different directions. You have to be able to change with the times. What do I mean by that? You got to figure out where things are going and how you're going to adapt, whether it's your style, whether it's the people you're working with, and maybe an issue can be you. So you have to really be introspective as much as you can. So that definitely prepared me there. I would say in terms of trajectory of the path of coaching these days, obviously, we have a very international sport. So just understanding your craft and just being able to create networks around you where you can actually draw talent from different pools and really associate yourself with folks you need to help grow your own brand or just grow your own program. Unfortunately, I play tennis at a pretty high level, so I naturally have a lot of contacts. But if you're trying to coach in a sport where maybe you weren't the best player or people didn't really know your name, you have to constantly make contacts as much as you can.
Thank you so much, Traci. Sherryta, same question for you. Kind of what challenges have you faced that have left an impact on the administrator that you are today?
Oh my goodness. As I think about this question and listening to Maisha and Kelly, offer their thoughts, the thing that I think about is, I was never a person who was very comfortable in front of a room. And I think the experiences of being comfortable, being uncomfortable was something I had to get used to throughout my career. And I think for me, that was a big challenge. Maisha said it in terms of, getting in front of an 8th grade class. For me, it was getting in front of a room of coaches with Traci and others, getting up there and talking to them about compliance rules and what they could do and what they couldn't do. and how that was going to impact the institution, to be seen as a high-level administrator, and to be thrust into that role and not necessarily being confident in that space all the time was something that I think was a major challenge, and something that I think, as young people are listening in the room, kind of wondering where their career paths are going to take them. I'm sure there are people in the room who are uncomfortable doing presentations or speeches and things like that. But I have found that without discomfort, there is no growth. And so no matter what it is, if I am nervous about it, or if I'm on edge about it, it's because it's an opportunity for me to rise to the occasion, and therefore I will be better for it in my career. And once I learned that, I was okay with those uncomfortable moments, and I used it as a challenge. And so you think about the preparation that you need when you are in those moments. You think about the value you can bring and the message that you can share in those moments. So it becomes a more positive thing. In terms of just navigating my role as an administrator, in terms of, thinking about the specific pieces, I dealt with difficult coaches, coaches who, it was hard to get them to understand what the responsibilities were. I dealt with major NCAA violations. So on the other side of what Maisha was sharing in terms of, being in front of the committee on infractions and having to, articulate your institutional position and the things that you're doing to protect the integrity of the place. Those are moments that you don't forget, that certainly, prepare you for where you are. Other challenging things that I have faced, I do feel like as a Black woman in this profession, sometimes people look at you and they're not sure how you got there, whether you're prepared and whether you're someone that they should be paying attention to or listening to. And so when you're in a leadership role, whether it be as an athletic director or as a head coach, you have to, or at least I feel like there's more pressure and there's more accountability that I own. And I think that certainly puts me in a position where I feel like I need to rise to the occasion even more so because of how that is seen from the outside. Right or wrong, that's how I look at it. And I do feel like, whether you're a coach or administrator or, anyone who's working in a profession where that kind of focus or target is on you, you do feel that occasionally, and how you navigate that is really important.
Sherryta, I'm gonna.
Kristy, I'm sorry if I could add one thing to that question, because I think Sherryta also really hit this home. The way that I've started to look at it, and perhaps it's 2 years of dealing with COVID, and actually now being in a position where you're asked to talk a lot about your experience and your pathway to how you've gotten challenges, experiences, whether the good and the bad, and professional, personal, they really are a training ground. And so the three of us have been former student athletes, right? You're conditioned. There's a training that you do to be in a position to make that last shot, to win that match, to finish that race. And so I think the way that I've really started to capture my experiences and that lead to this moment is that it's all about that training ground and those experiences and being able to rise to that occasion. So regardless of if you're a student athlete or not, to the students, I think it's a really good way to start thinking about how you train yourself, how you train your mind. And life is about a mental and physical wellness. And so better to start thinking about it early than later.
Thank you so much for adding that. I'm going to go back to Sherryta. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because for those of you who don't know, Sherryta is actually the person who gave me my start in athletics. So we talk pretty frequently, and we've talked kind of in more recent times about kind of what I'm going to dive into next. And Sherryta, you mentioned it as being a Black woman in this field, and all three of you on this call, I referred to you earlier as trailblazers. You're all the first Black woman to hold your position. And Sherryta, you talked a little bit about the pressure that comes with that and that responsibility that you feel that you burden. How do you balance that weight while also managing to kind of protect your peace, right? We've talked in a prep call, this job, all of our jobs can be emotionally draining, but my lens is obviously different from the lens
day by day, meeting by meeting, week by week, you take it into segments, right? And I think Kristy, you identified, in terms of how you introduced the question, in terms of being able to talk through those issues too. You have to have people around you that you can share your ups, your downs, to ask for advice. So for me, whether it be, mentors that have hired me in the past, or mentors who I continue to talk to that offer advice, those are the people that I lean on. And I think about the women that have come before me, Black women, but also women who have ascended in this profession in various ways, and men included. There has to be a network of people around you that keep you grounded, that keep you confident, that keep you kind of in tune to whether you need to take a break, or whether you need to think about things in a different way. So I think my balance comes from others around me in terms of getting that support, but then also recognizing when I need to take a step back and take care of myself. Whether that's, playing new hoops here. So, I was a former basketball player, and, I'm getting up there in age, but, I still try to get out there occasionally, and that's fun. You have to balance the challenging moments with fun. You have to balance it with time with family. So whenever I can get away and spend time with those that I love, that's rejuvenating as well. And, whether it's a silly TV show, or, reading a book, or, going to Zumba class and dancing. And Kristy knows these things because we chat at least once a week about what's going on in our lives. It's really important to be able to step away and to not think about all of the challenging and difficult things that we're dealing with. And we're dealing with some challenging and difficult things right now. And I think everybody on this call knows, the last 2 years and navigating COVID, and having to navigate that as an athletic director, and telling student athletes that their seasons are ending early, or that their seasons are going to be condensed or reduced, or we've got to postpone games because of that, or dealing with the realities of life and people who are passing away or significantly ill with COVID has been a really, really challenging environment. And mental health issues are escalating in lots of different ways. And so when I'm thinking about the weight of day to day, plus the weight of being the first Black woman to serve as an athletic director, it can get to be a lot. So you have to take it day by day. You have to put it all in perspective. Bill Bradshaw, former athletic director at Temple University, who hired me at Temple and is a mentor of mine, he used to say, don't take yourself too seriously. And I really believe that 100%. Like, you can't take yourself too seriously. You got to recognize that life is all about having perspective, and you got to have fun, and you got to enjoy the moments. Otherwise, it'll go by so quickly, you won't realize that you didn't enjoy it. So I try to do that as much as possible.
Traci, you mentioned that the ever-changing role that you play in the world of college athletics changing, and being on the front lines and working with our student athletes. And how do you, and being a Black head women's tennis coach, how do you balance that? How do you manage to kind of protect your peace and practice self-care and that success?
A lot of the same things Sherryta was talking about. I mean, you have to have some sacred time on your schedule, meaning you just block out a certain time, whether it's every day, once a week, you name it, schedule that vacation that you need to go on in a few months, right? Because that rejuvenation is so important. In tennis, there are not a lot of folks that look like me. In coaching, there are not a lot of folks that look like me. So we have our own little small network. So I'm on a bunch of, group texts. I do my own mentoring at this stage. So it's always fun to reach out and give back, but you also need that for yourself in different ways. One of the things I also learned over the years, you need to create a community outside of where you work, kind of like Sherryta was talking about already. And once you have that community, it does also energize you and build you up, and also gives you that boost when you need it. Where you work, you do also want to have allies. But I also learned it's important to have allies that are, in your corner, but it's also important to have people who will be your advocates when you're not there in the room, right? So you have those folks who will, talk, positive about you and be there for you while you're right there next to them. But when you're not there in that meeting, you're not there at that coach's call, you're not at the match or whatever, who's really in your corner in that moment, right? And that's a concept, again, I probably didn't completely get that when I was, undergrad and graduate school, but now that's more important than ever, right? I mean, look at the climate that we're in. The world is more polarized than ever, maybe, who knows? But again, I'm so grateful for people who have been my allies and also advocates and all the groups I'm a part of outside of work and in work.
Thank you so much. Maisha, you're coming up on your first year, right? In June, you'll have your 1-year anniversary. And so stepping in as an athletic director during an incredibly challenging time, we talked about, COVID and Sherryta cancellation and condensing of seasons. And so all of the pressures that come along with that and stepping into a new role as an athletic director. So how do you balance that in regards to the same question that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so candidly, I don't do a great job with balance, but I'm okay with that for right now. I really believe that I sit here because of people that came before me and who pressed hard locally, nationally, and so that's really important. So I'm a foot on the gas kind of person, and people around here know that it's rare for me to say no. I found that actually a lot of my time currently is spent certainly working with our team and our organization and building the department and vision that we want and going out and really being a successful department for our student athletes, but also because of geographically where we are and our campus community, that there's some places where I just need to show up and I'm happy to do so. And that really means a presence within the university life, whether it be faculty and staff and having that presence, alumni, and then also the community of West Philadelphia. And so I really believe that that's my give back. I'm somebody who benefited, and I've shared this with just as we were preparing, preparing for this, I'm someone who benefited from Philadelphia recreation. So for me, it's really important to ensure that the community of West Philadelphia, that there are children who look like me or have experiences that maybe aren't as accessible as the ones that I've had, that we figure out a way to be that presence given where we are geographically. And so those are all things that I'm committed to do. I think that, so for me, it's the balance is, when the work is done, there'll be perhaps a little more balance. I do take the time though, and I fortunately have a supportive team here, but I do make sure that I carve out and can be that mom where I can leave, go get my children and maybe it's coming back and bringing them with, or also finding those windows of time to involve them in my professional life here. Those things are really important. But again, my commitment is to ensuring that not only is it about Drexel athletics, but it's about Drexel University and how we show up in all of our various areas across campus and with alumni, and certainly here in West Philadelphia.
Thank you so much for that. This is the last question that we have before we open it up for those. So for those here, if you have questions, get ready, or for those who are watching us virtually. We talked about this a lot, and you've already inspired countless people through your careers. Some you may realize you have, some you may not. But what kind of this our favorite question, right? What advice would you share with those who want to follow in the paths that you all took? And you've talked a little bit about it throughout this panel, but if you had that one piece, right, that one thing you've learned, or one piece of advice, what would that be for these folks as they move forward? I'll open it up if you want to take that one first.
I'm happy to go first. I often am asked this question, and I don't answer it the same way every time, because I think there's never one piece of advice. And so, I think about the moment in terms of all the things that have been shared and what else I can add. And I think today I would say that you don't need to have all the answers. I think when I was sitting, in the classroom as an undergrad or even in graduate school, I didn't know that I was going to be sitting here as an athletic director in, February of 2018. Like, I didn't know that that was going to be the destination that was going to be on my path. But what I knew in that moment was that I needed to be great where I was. I needed to excel, and I needed to, to be good at whatever it is that I was doing. So if I was, taking a class, or if I was playing on my team, or if I was, working in a particular department or office, I always thought about what value am I bringing? What am I bringing my A game today? And hopefully that will lead to opportunities tomorrow. So my advice is bring your A game in the moment, in the day, and the rest will take care of itself. And your path will be your path, because I think we all have, are sitting in the seats that we're in, and we've all navigated it in different ways. And that's okay. And your path will be your path. And you don't need to have the answers today, but just be the best version of yourself each and every day.
Yeah, I will add that be authentic, feel good about do what's right for you. Oftentimes it's appropriate, right? You have advisors, mentors, but then really kind of close your eyes and see and do what feels right to you, and being authentic in where you want to do it, the kind of work you want to do. And that's something that some of it will come with time and experience, right? You have to kind of do some things before you figure out what's that right experience. I started out as an intern at Atlantic 10 doing marketing, and I knew I didn't want to do cold call marketing, because that's what that was back then, trying to sell sponsorship packages. But eventually you evolve to do what feels right for you. Traci mentioned it earlier also, networking, getting out there and getting all those experiences so that you can arrive at that point of what is it that you want to do as far as professionally, what feels right personally, and the impact you want to have on this, whatever space it may be, whether it's intercollegiate athletics or wherever industry you go towards.
And don't forget to give back, right? Do things that fill you up. Obviously, work can get stressful and obviously time consuming. We all know that. But give back, find things that you like to do. For me personally, one of the organizations I'm a part of is the Black Women in Sport Foundation. And we help young women get involved in all aspects of sports, young Black women and men. That's one of the things. But the other thing is really surround yourself with people who will help you achieve your goals. And we call them goal builders or goal busters. Obviously, the goal builders on our team, my tennis team at Harvard, the people who are going to help you achieve your goals, and the people who are going to knock you down. You got to get away from those people as soon as you can. And later in life, you're going to figure it takes some time every now and then. But once you figure out who those people are who are going to help you achieve your goals, bring those people in, bring them close. It's worth it.
We're going to turn it over to the audiences for questions. My in-person audience, we'd like you to actually stand. We're going to try to get the camera pointing towards you so that our panel can see your great faces. Just stand, introduce yourself, and ask your question. And those folks that are in the virtual audience, please put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. Please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll go back and forth in terms of filling questions.
I have a question for Ms. Freeman. I'll preface this by saying I've been to 17 Lehigh Lafayette games in my life, and you can probably tell which side of the rivalry I'm on just by how I announce the game. But correct me if I'm wrong, I know that 6 or 7 years ago, Patriot League granted football teams the ability to grant scholarships. How has that affected the racial diversity that you see both within the football program and just in the athletic department in general?
So I did have some difficulty hearing that question. So Kristy, I don't know if you could summarize that for me.
Sure. Well, we've been to about 17 different Lafayette Lehigh games, right?
Okay. All right. I missed that. That's awesome.
But he wanted to talk about in more recent times, the ability to grant scholarships in the Patriot League, and correct me if I'm wrong, how that has impacted the racial diversity.
Yes, I mean, I know, ironically, it seems that the product on the football field across the entire Patriot League has gone down, but I wanted to see if, how the diversity has affected by it. Just being able to get out for scholarships, maybe, I mean, some people included that wouldn't have been able to without the financial help.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I got enough of it to be able to answer the question. And I think you're right. Certainly I'm excited that you've been able to attend so many rivalry games. It's definitely quite an experience to be a part of the Lafayette Lehigh rivalry, but certainly for the football games. When it comes to the scholarships and the impact, you know, I think understanding the transition from need-based aid to scholarship provides tremendous opportunities for our coaches to go out and find student athletes who can, one, perform academically in the ways that we need them to at Lafayette, but also to be able to offer an opportunity for them to play a sport that they absolutely love. So I think, you know, in terms of racial diversity and the opportunities there, certainly being able to offer full scholarships to students makes their opportunities more achievable in terms of being able to come to an institution that is quite expensive. But what I will say too is, before we were operating with scholarships, we also did have a pretty significant commitment in the need-based world as well. And so being able to consistently provide those opportunities, whether it be through scholarship or through need-based aid, which also continues here at Lafayette as well, is something that we're proud of. What I will say in terms of commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, and increasing the diversity on our campus is something that we still feel like we have work yet to achieve in that space, whether it be in athletics or across campus generally. And so, you know, it's something that, you know, we discuss all the time in terms of how we can provide more resources to provide more opportunities for young people to attend our institution.
Okay. We have a question in the chat, and I'm asking folks, please put the questions in the Q&A, not the chat. Please scroll down to the bottom, put them in the Q&A. So we have a question: what advice do you have for young Black women as they leave college, knowing they will face challenges not because of what they know, but because of the color of their skin? Thank you, Elvis.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and certainly Sherryta and Traci can add on. I think that it's the confidence factor, and knowing that you are going to be, when you are in spaces, you belong there. And so really being confident about who you are and where you want to go. It's also looking for those opportunities, and looking for those opportunities to connect with individuals who can be influential. So whether that's other women of color, men of color, white men, white women. So it's really looking for those. I think, Traci, you said, I forget the term that you used, but for people who are going to also help you with your goals. And I cannot express enough about the network. I think that there's not a job that I have not gotten or interviewed for that hasn't been outside of a form, me learning about it, hearing about it from somebody inside, to get inside somebody inside an organization to get involved in it. And that's huge. And so that's whether it's volunteering and just, again, knowing that you are in a space because you're meant to be there and you belong. It also working with and getting advice on how best to navigate, how best to present yourself, and that exude that confidence when you're speaking. I think that we certainly are judged far more when it comes to how we interview, the way we respond, the way that we take up space physically on a Zoom. And so again, it kind of goes back to that training and ensuring that you're having those conversations about how best to prepare yourself. And I know that's exhausting, and it's unfortunate that we're saying that in 2022. It's just the reality.
Yeah, the one thing that I will add, and I think Maisha is absolutely right, is, thinking about your preparation, but also getting the feedback from your network and being around people who will be honest with you. So one of the things that I learned early in my career that I think was helpful was to ask for feedback. How am I doing? If I didn't get a job, what could I have articulated better, or what are the aspects of whatever the responsibilities are? What am I missing? And even when I was actually in a role, not being settled and okay with just doing the job that I was doing, I certainly had aspirations to do more. So even asking my supervisor, like, hey, what are the things that I can be better at? What are the ways in which I can, expand my skill set? What do you think I need to be stronger in? And being okay with the feedback you receive, and actually say, this person was willing to be honest with me. Let me take this and go and do this with it in a positive way. And I would say I learned a lot from those conversations of, not what am I good at? What am I not good at? And what am I not doing well, so that I could fix it and move forward.
I think I'll add one more thing to these great answers here. Is just make sure the space is right for you. Obviously, you belong everywhere in every space, but do your research. Make sure that space you're trying to go into is right for you, that you will have the potential supports that you need and be able to navigate in ways that you think you can. So just try to do your research before you go to a new opportunity. Don't just take it because it sounds great or whatever.
And here's one question. So certainly, whether you are a Black woman or whomever you are, when you're interviewing, ask whomever you're interviewing with, can you see me in this role? Do you see any challenges, right? So now you're putting that out in the universe, and someone's having to think about it and really sort of own what their vision is for that role in us, and it's connected to you. I think that's a really powerful question to ask during an interview process, should you be at that point. So I think that's another perhaps tool to consider.
That's a great point, Maisha. Thank you so much. There was a question.
So Ms. Green talked about being in rooms where there weren't a lot of people that looked like her, and I assume all of you have experienced something like this. Has there been a situation where you needed to stand up for yourself as Black women in sport? And if so, how did you handle it?
Could you guys see that?
Yeah, I can jump in. And so this perhaps this is really kind of pre-professional time for me. I was a product of Philadelphia public school system for my elementary, middle school years. And then because of track and field giving me some additional access, I actually went to a private high school outside the city. It's sort of the joke, right? Like some of these schools don't really recruit to their athletic teams, but certainly they do. And I was I was one person of color. And I think that it was another one of those wake up moments where having to establish myself in the classroom, establish myself in that I belonged. And so the way, I don't know that, I think I'm sharing this because that's the one that sticks out the most for me, in such a stark difference of the space and the environment that I was in. And really the way that I went about navigating it is, again, it's showing up and knowing that I belong there. So needing to be a strong student, participating, needing to make sure that I did what I needed to do in practices and on the track when it came to competition. And so I think that all translates for how, again, that I've navigated even these spaces where, while people may internally question it, I'm not exuding that. I'm exuding that I belong in the room. So sort of a don't ask. My training ground was, it started just long ago, right, through those grade school and high school experiences.
I will add that I can't say to date that I've experienced anything overtly where I needed to, as the way you phrased the question, stand up for myself. But I do think in terms of microaggressions or those moments where you have to make it clear that you belong in the room, those happen pretty frequently. And, whether it's, someone who says, hey, what year are you, asking, immediately assuming that you're a student. And some of that may be, you may look a little bit younger, but in a lot of ways, I think there's an assumption that's made that, there's no way that you could possibly, be in this space because of the fact that you are, a Black woman or that you are a younger Black woman. And so I think, one of the things that I find to be true is that you have to reinforce the value that you bring and that you belong in that space, and to do it in a way that's professional, to do it in a way where it's clear to that person that you belong in that space, and that, maybe they shouldn't make that assumption and ask that question in the ways that they have done it.
All right, we'll go to our virtual audience for a question. This is coming in from Casey McCullough. She asks, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Traci, do you want to take this question?
Sure, I'll do that one. So many things, probably. I like the IRA one though. Maybe Bitcoin too. I don't know. Yeah. Seriously, networking is huge. I think when I was younger, I'm an introvert naturally. I think I'm like, I don't know, 48% on the Myers-Briggs, whatever. So I think I probably would have put myself out there more when I was, in grad school age, and below. I think that probably would have given me more opportunities, maybe. That's probably the biggest advice I would probably give myself, besides Bitcoin early and IRA.
Yeah, as I said before, I think the authentic, but also give grace to yourself and grace to others. I think that's important for the balance piece. I'm probably a fairly wound tight person, but I think it's right. It's the high expectations of yourself, high expectations of others. So balance and giving grace too, and really the authentic piece is just critical. And again, for me, that's been a personal journey in building to that and being confident, because I certainly, we say these things, but we all also have arrived at really great positions professionally. And I think it's a building block.
I would say to not be too hard on yourself. And I think it's very similar to what Traci and Maisha have already shared. I think for me, I was very shy and pretty quiet. And so putting myself out there was something that I had to learn to do early in my career. And if I had learned it earlier, I would have had more practice and more time at it. But at the same time, everybody comes to life or steps into whatever that space is when they are ready. So don't be too hard on yourself if it's not easy when you first try to do something, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to not feel right. And that's okay. But eventually you have to work yourself through to be in those uncomfortable spaces that I shared earlier. You've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's what's going to lead to your success in the future.
We have a question from the audience.
Hi, my name is James Sierra. So my question is, what is one of the biggest advancements that you've seen for women in athletics, either administrative or from an athletic standpoint? And then what are some of the best practices that you've seen over your experiences for women's athletics or minorities in sport for advancement, and how we can take that forward going into our careers?
What was the first part again?
Advancement. I think is that correct? One of the biggest advancements that we've seen for women of color in sport. Is that correct, Kristy or Deborah?
Yes.
Yeah. I do think that there has been, at least in the administrative ranks, and I think that the last few years, the timing and the landscape is right, where we're seeing more and more whether it be women of color, men of color even. I think there was just a recent announcement this morning, right? Somebody else who was going to send to a Division I athletic director role who was a man of color. And so I think that we're seeing that more. If you look at the SEC, the SWAs and the SEC are predominantly Black women, which is really great. And certainly with an athletic director, I was a first at Vanderbilt. And so there are, while not exploding, so to speak, but I do think that the last couple of years, the discourse has been such where we're drawing attention and we're looking at the numbers and really holding ourselves accountable and holding institutions, organizations, departments accountable. And so I think like I do want to give recognition to that happening and that happening in this environment. I don't remember the second part of the question. Oh, best practices, I believe. And so I think it's stuff like this is a best practice from grassroots. I look at from a grassroots perspective, and whether that be through professional associations for coaches, administrators, but then even grassroots through NGBs and other youth, that is the, in my opinion, I think that's the effective way. And so us being present in those spaces, the Traci give back comment, I mean, that is the most effective. We've got to feed the pipeline and we've got to show up and be supportive of it.
And Maisha, I couldn't agree more. And I think the three of us on this call and the roles that we've ascended to is a testament to the fact that there has been advancement. And I think there's certainly significant more strides that need to be made. But there is progress that we're seeing. And I think the ability for those who are sitting in these leadership roles to have success, to do a great job further, I think perpetuates the opportunities in the future. Certainly a lot of pressure for those who are sitting in those seats. But, they talk about, leave the door open, but you got to leave the door open wider than when you went through the crack. You may have gone through the crack, but you want to open it up a little wider for the person that's coming up behind you. One of the things that I think is important too, that in terms of continuing with this idea of advancement, is making sure that you're bringing people along with you. So the give back, what does that look like for you? Who are you a mentor to? Who are you reaching out to? Checking in on, your former, staff members that you've hired, making sure that you are hiring people that represent the future that you want to see. So whether that's hiring more people of color, hiring more women, to making sure that the diversity continues. And I know for me, I've tried to do that along my career in terms of providing opportunities, whether it be as full-time staff members or graduate assistants, making sure that, or student workers, wherever I could be a mentor and provide an impact for people to be able to utilize me as a resource, and still to utilize me as a resource to this day, to be able to continue to open doors for them, is what I'm committed to, on top of, my role in terms of being an athletic director at Lafayette. I have a community commitment to making sure that college athletics is what I want it to be in the future as well.
I think these two did everything on that topic. One thing I have seen is more and more plans of attack to create a better future. For example, we're going to Northwestern on Saturday to play a match, and it's one of their kids' days, and it's one of their initiatives that we're partnering with them on, where we have young kids, so it's within the rules and everything, coming to the match and watching us play, and then we're doing a Q&A session after the match. So we're actually reaching the community a different kind of way. It's stuff like that's happened in the past, but people actually have a plan to do so many of these a year, or so many X, Y, and Z, or interview so many people. So I think I'm seeing more and more plans these days. So it is exciting it is exciting that way.
We have a question from our virtual audience. As a Black woman in leadership, what are some of the qualities you look for in inspiring young sport professionals?
So I look for confidence, how you present yourself. That's really important. But then also a willingness to learn and eagerness to learn and help find the answers. Sherryta mentioned it before. When I was that 8th grade student teacher, I'll never forget the time where a student asked me a question and I sort of froze because I just didn't know the answer. Then I came to realize you don't always have to know the answer, right? Sometimes you want to be 2 pages ahead of the students, or you can always do the get back to you. But it's really important that it's individuals who are eager to learn and eager to impact their space by finding out what's best for the landscape and being able to articulate that. And again, it comes with time as far as being able to articulate a vision and how you would impact the space. But again, it's that eagerness to learn. And so I think that shows up in the kinds of questions, the quality of questions that a young administrator asks through a process, and then also just how they carry themselves. That is a big piece for me.
Yeah, I think for me, no matter, what level of position, whether it be a coach or, an entry-level administrator position or an executive administrative position, you're looking for a particular skill set, yes, but the role aside, you are looking for someone who wants to be in the role, who's able to articulate a certain energy or a motivation to be good at what they do. And that just comes from, I think, a high level of confidence. Certainly will help with that. But also, I like hiring people who have been leaders too. So whether you've been a captain on your team, or you've been a leader of a particular club or organization, whether if you're coming from the college ranks, or if you've been serving on committees, if it's an administrator role that's at a higher level, looking for people who have impact beyond just the normal day-to-day. So are you stepping out of your comfort zone? Are you putting yourself in a position where you are seen as a leader? For me is pretty important.
Hi, my name is Richard. When overcoming challenges, when you first entered the sport industry, what aspect would you say was more challenging, being a woman in sport or being Black in sport?
I think it's hard for me to separate the two, to be honest, because I own both of those lenses. I can't take either one of those off. Can't hide either one. So I think to answer your question, I try to understand what I need to do in order to navigate the perceptions that come with either being a woman or being Black in this industry and overcoming that. And owning that in all the spaces that I'm in, and making sure that I represent for Black folks, but also for women in the industry too.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. It's hard to separate, right? Because my identity is both. But what I have seen and was a part of an organization where it was very clear that being a Black woman was a differentiator to how white women in our organization were treated. So I would say that showed up amongst a group of us within the organization. So, but it's really hard to decouple the two because it's who I am. And, again, that's a challenging one to sort of navigate out unless you truly, it was very overt in this organization that I was a part of. And so we were able to speak to it, gain some allies within the organization and address it. And while it wasn't totally resolved during my time, at least it gave us an opportunity to really call it out, which I actually think that's another piece, another tool when finding the confidence. And that's why knowing different allies or advisors within an organization, being able to call something out in an appropriate way is a really important pathway, period, regardless of the set of issues, but certainly at the intersection of identity.
And let's hope you all in the audience can help change this, right? Make it so there's no issue being a woman and no issue being Black, right?
We have a question from the virtual audience. I'm gonna paraphrase some of it. We've been talking about stereotypes to a certain degree. So as you have navigated your spaces, you know there's sometimes a stereotype for women in leaders, especially Black women in leadership, to be that angry Black woman. So how have you been able to kind of navigate that, doing your job, doing it well, being yourself, but seeing counterparts kind of exhibiting similar behaviors, but not getting labeled in the same way?
You know, I think it's an excellent question, for sure. And I'm not going to say I'm stumped, but I think it's a difficult one to answer because I don't consider myself to be an angry Black woman in any way, shape, or form. And I've not come across professional women who are working in athletics or outside of athletics who are confident, who speak their minds, who are able to offer feedback or criticism. If you are who you are and you're doing that in a professional way, to me, that's how I categorize it. I don't consider it to be angry. So I think that's the label that is placed upon us, but I don't think we, or at least I don't see myself operating in that space. I think the counter to that always is, you know, I try to make sure that even when I am delivering difficult information, and I think any person needs to do this, is to be able to do that in a professional and a respectful way. And if it's done that way, you can call me whatever you want to call me. I will make sure that I'm delivering in the way that I feel is professional, respectful, and I move on from there. Stereotypes and people are going to have their thoughts, let them have it. You do what you got to do in order to do the job that you need to do.
And sadly, I think we have to assume bias, you know, in our roles, right? A lot of people are going to be biased out there, you know, or what they call haters are going to hate, you know, kind of thing. So you do, like I already said already, we have to learn how to navigate in these roles, and maybe there's some things you have to do personally to prevent any doubt in people's minds that, you know, there is an issue with you, right? Sometimes that's making decisions when you're nice and calm with no emotions. That could be, you know, talking in the voice that I'm talking right now to you, or that I'm talking very seriously, but my voice is not raised. So it could be, again, it's you're in a tough spot. People are going to be biased against you a lot, probably, sadly, in this field. That's just reality, probably, at least in tennis, because there aren't very many of us, and people are shocked. I could be on the airplane and my assistant be next to me, I'm like, oh, you're the head coach. I'm like, no, there's a coach. Oh, cool, so you're the assistant. And they're like, no, I'm the head. So it's like the same thing. So, but it doesn't even faze me. So it goes in one ear, out the other. So again, it goes back to the whole thick skin thing, and just knowing your environment and knowing when to actually let something get under your skin and when not to.
Yeah, I'll just echo. I mean, I think that both Traci and Sherryta hit it spot on. It's I've never been called one in the room, and so I make assumptions that certainly there perhaps are people who are going to have biases, right? Their biases as to assumptions as to why I sit in the seat that I sit today, or why I maybe have been in different rooms and spaces. But for me, it's just thinking about how I deliver myself as a professional. And there are certain things that I actually need to do just from a professional standpoint. I often tell folks I'm not as flowery, so I got to figure out how to sometimes deliver, not being just so straightforward. Not everyone can handle that. So those are things, though, that I think regardless of who you are, you need to think about your delivery. Think about, for me, right, those students that were in that room back as a 23-year-old and how I'm delivering information to them, how they're hearing, communicating. And those are just things that I think anyone needs to think about as a professional. And perhaps, right, those biases that exist are something too that just can't be decoupled away from who we are and how we've had to come up through social and professional settings.
Got another question from the audience?
So you guys are talking a lot about giving back to communities and spaces. As a minority in sport, I grew up in inner city where a lot of kids like myself and minorities are fans of sport, NBA, NFL, you know, collegiate athletics, but they don't really understand and to be completely honest, I didn't understand this aspect of sport until I got to the Temple either. Again, which from an administrative standpoint, they don't understand that there's a way that they can get involved in athletics because of playing sport. What do you think are some things that we can do to help people, from the inner city of Philadelphia to understand that they can still be involved in sport without playing or coaching?
I think your question is so important, and I think that's where administrators and folks like us on the call have to get out and really give back. So whether that's going back, I used to go back to my high school and in my community back in Hillside, New Jersey, and the surrounding townships, and I would come and I would talk about the career that I've had and how I was exposed to different aspects of sport that did not involve playing or coaching, because you're right, that's what people see most readily. And I was exposed to it, pretty early in my career as a student athlete at Dartmouth. I worked in the athletic department. I understood that there were roles in facilities and operations and marketing and communications and compliance, and that there could be a career in sport because I didn't want to coach, and for sure knew that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete in the sport of women's basketball. And so, for me, that exposure was important very early in my career, but you're absolutely right. We have to continue to do that in pockets, but also as a collective. So, if you can impact the community that you're in, so we try to do that here in Easton, Pennsylvania, and the Lehigh Valley. And I think if all of us can put our heads together to think about ways in which we can give back and be examples for members of our community, it will help kind of dispel the myth that there's only, a few ways to be involved in sport as a professional.
Yeah, I think it's, as I've said before, and I'm a big believer in the grassroots effort, and I really do think that's a place to educate not only access and how to perhaps prepare to become, excel as an athlete, but then also just exposing youth. We have not unique, but we have the opportunity of being again, where we are geographically, where our relationships, and I've already been a part of those conversations with West Philly Promise, West Powelton, and other areas here about how do we get students, how do we get young children to, whether it be at Vitus or into the DAC for events, opening up our doors to Philadelphia Department of Recreation to be able to provide for lifeguard training, right? And so it's really ensuring that we intersect ourselves in those spaces of organized organizations that need our help, need our support, but then also our student athletes, our professionals being exposed and partnering too with NGBs or other sports organizations, right? So on our campus, we've got USA Squash. And so there's the Squash Smarts program where students who come to campus from Philadelphia Public Schools, our wrestling program has a community relationship where we bring students into the building. And so it's not just the athletics piece, but there's the mentoring, and how do we mentor to expose them to college age student athletes, a college experience, a college environment, and really talking about pursuing intercollegiate athletics, but not always just as that star basketball student athlete. I think the exposure, and particularly in urban areas, it's about exposing to more than just the traditional sports of basketball, of track and field, but it's across the spectrum, and making sure that we're working with other organizations, whether it be professional, Olympic development, and so on. That is critical, and I think that's how we start to shift that narrative and also educate.
We have one last question for our panel as we wrap up today. I think it's a pretty great one. As a Black woman in sport, or really as a student in sport, you just talked about mentorship, Maisha. How do you find mentors in the industry? How can you advise them to find that good mentor?
Yeah, I will say that's a tough one for me, because I don't know that I'm an introvert, but I'm certainly more probably reserved. I'm a product of being holding it all in and being a lot more reserved, and a willingness to share. So all these things are really helpful for me. This is a part of, like I said, when we were preparing for this, no question is too vulnerable. And so I can own the fact that that I probably have not done as good of a job finding that formal mentoring, but I've definitely identified friends along the way. I look and still keep in touch with people who have reciprocated an interest in me, and that I've been interested and intrigued by the work that they've done. And so it's really about looking for folks who want to think that that part of whatever they're doing, whether it be their leadership style, how they carry themselves, that resonates with me. And then they reciprocate that interest, right? So that there's this opportunity to just grow together. And for me, an organic mentorship. I haven't done well with the formal ones. I'm always happy to make myself accessible, but I think that personally, I've been a little more challenged being under formal mentorships, mostly, to be honest with you, because again, there wasn't always that reciprocated investment in the time and interest. And so I guess I share that because I've had some bad experiences. So I've just kind of tried to look for friends and look for people who, again, there's aspects of their work that really resonate with me and I feel like I can grow through.
I think the best mentorship relationships that I've had have been the ones that have happened organically. So I think to Maisha's point, and maybe it's because I have a similar personality where, I do keep things pretty close to the vest, and, it takes me a little bit of time to trust people to be able to share all the things that happen in a real mentorship relationship. So, my mentors have been people that I've worked for or people that have taught me. So whether it be professors or supervisors, if we have developed a strong relationship, those are people who have who've remained mentors and friends, quite frankly, along the way. But to help you in terms of navigating how you might do that from the seat that you're in, occasionally I do get emails from students, whether they be undergraduate students or graduate students who are interested in being an athletic administrator. Sometimes I'll engage in informational interviews where it's just kind of, asking or answering the questions that the student may have. And some I maintain contact with. They'll let me know, like, hey, I just applied for a job here. Would you have any advice for me as I'm going into this interview, or things like that. So I think it's okay to reach out to people that you don't know and, ask them about their careers. But I think the people you are closest to, starting with, if you're a student at Temple listening right now, there are professors and people who work at the university who would be happy to share with you, their path, their professional path, and how they've been able to navigate where they are. And those are the people that I think organically are the best start. And then as you navigate throughout your career, you'll find others who will be invested in your career as well that you'll maintain contact with.